I got into my husband's car one evening and found a tube of personal lubricant in the glove compartment. I didn't say a word. I just quietly replaced it with industrial superglue. What happened next forced our neighbors to call the fire department. I'm so glad you're here. If you're watching this, please like and subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far this story of revenge has traveled. I sat at the kitchen table. The silence in the house was as thick as morning fog, a silence that had become an unwelcome, permanent guest. The old clock on the wall, a wedding gift from my late mother, ticked with a relentless, accusatory rhythm. Each beat was a painful reminder that my life might have been a meticulously crafted lie. My husband, Julian, had just returned from one of his countless business dinners. He didn't just look exhausted, he looked haunted, as if carrying a secret too heavy to bear. His face was a map of fatigue and guilt, new lines carved around his eyes and mouth. He tossed his jacket on the sofa, loosened his tie like it was a noose, and collapsed onto the bed without showering. The faint scent of his expensive cologne lingered in the air, but tonight it was mixed with something new, a sweet, floral perfume that felt like an intruder in my home, a silent confession from a life I didn't know he was living. Minutes later, the gentle hum of his snoring filled the house. Once, that sound had comforted me. Now it felt like a cruel lullaby, a lullaby for a fool. I stood, moving with the quiet grace of a wife of 40 years, and began tidying the mess he'd left. His jacket, his wallet, his phone, his old laptop. His phone screen was still glowing, a new email, bright as a warning flare. Julian never used email. He always said, "Juliet, that tech stuff is too complicated. I'd rather just make a call." But there it was, a message, sitting in plain sight. Curiosity and dread wrestled inside me as I tapped it open. The message was short, only a handful of words, but they shattered my world. "You were incredible tonight, Dad. Red heart hash." I froze. The word Dad echoed in my head like a gunshot. Who was calling him that? And in such an intimate, affectionate tone? I scrolled down, my thumb trembling. Nothing. Just a strange email address, a meaningless jumble of letters and numbers. No clues. No answers. A shiver ran through me, not from cold, but from a bone-deep fear. It felt like a door had cracked open somewhere in my life, letting in a draft from a world I didn't know existed. Julian turned over in the bedroom and snored softly, his face peaceful, infuriatingly peaceful, while my heart pounded like a thief's. I put the phone back carefully, hands shaking so hard I almost dropped it. Then I kept moving, my body mechanical, robotic. When I checked his pant pockets, my fingers brushed a folded paper. A receipt from a fancy steakhouse in San Antonio, dated tonight, but Julian had told me he was meeting partners in Dallas. A bitter laugh escaped me. Julian hated Dallas. San Antonio, though. San Antonio was where his late mother had lived. He had always spoken of it fondly. The receipt showed a party of two, a bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon, the same wine he'd bought me for our 10th anniversary, and two entrees, fillet and pasta. I tried to remember the last time Julian had taken me somewhere like that. Maybe 10 years ago, when I opened my first bakery. A memory etched into my mind, the flickering candlelight, his proud smile, his toast to my success. Now that memory felt tainted, a faded photograph in a scrapbook of lies. I took out my phone and snapped a picture of the receipt, then the email. I didn't want to believe it, but after 40 years of marriage, a woman knows. Something was wrong, and I had to find out what. I went to the garage. Julian's SUV was still warm, the air thick with the smell of gasoline and that faint floral perfume. I opened the door and searched, my dread cold and sharp. At first, nothing, just loose change and an empty water bottle. Then I opened the glove box. My fingers touched something smooth and slippery. I pulled it out and my heart stopped. A tube of personal lubricant, the cap crusted with dried residue. I stared at it in the dim light, my breath frozen. Julian and I hadn't been intimate in years. He always said he was tired. So who was this for? I put it back exactly where I'd found it, then scrubbed my hands with a napkin until they were raw, as if betrayal could leave a stain. I searched again, methodically this time, and found more evidence, crumpled napkins soaked in that same alien perfume. I photographed everything. Then I closed the car, the weight of proof pressing down on me. I sat at the kitchen table again, hands trembling as I picked up Julian's phone. I checked his messages, only work chats, cold and professional. His inbox was empty except for that one email. Even his drafts folder was clean. Too clean. He had erased everything. A master of lies. Rage settled in my chest like a stone, and under it, something sharper, a hunger for truth. By dawn, I was still awake, standing in the kitchen, a ghost in my own home. The image of the receipt, the email, the lubricant swirled in my mind, a venomous carousel. I cracked 2 eggs into the pan, toasted bread, poured strong black coffee, my hands steady now, my resolve complete. This was no longer about doubt. It was about war. I had barely slept all night. Julian came downstairs looking tired, his hair disheveled, his eyes still groggy. He sat at the table, grabbed his coffee, took a sip, and set the cup down half full. "I have an important meeting today," he said in that husky voice, the same line he'd used countless times before, never meeting my eyes. He was good at this. Too good. The easy lies, the casual tone, they made my blood run cold. I nodded with a strained smile, though all I wanted was to scream. Where? With whom? In San Antonio again? But I stayed quiet, my rage a silent fire. "All right," I said softly. "Be careful." He patted my shoulder, a hollow slow gesture that felt more like obligation than affection, and left. The door closed, leaving the kitchen in its familiar, suffocating silence, and leaving me with a suspicion that was no longer just suspicion, but something monstrous. I cleared the table, washed the dishes one by one, each plate, each cup a small act of control and a life suddenly spinning out of it. I couldn't sit here inventing theories. I needed the truth. I picked up my phone and scrolled to the number for Mrs. Miller, the woman who'd helped me so much when I first opened the bakery. Years ago, she'd told me about a private investigator who specialized in infidelity cases. Juliet, if you ever need him, I can give you Thomas's number. He's very discreet. Back then, I never imagined I'd use it, but now I had no choice. I dialed her number, my voice trembling with every ring. Hello, Mrs. Miller. Can you help me get in touch with Thomas? I need him. There was a pause that spoke volumes. Juliet, she asked carefully, did Julian do something? I exhaled, my pride too raw to explain over the phone. I just need to know the truth. Can you help me? Mrs. Miller didn't press. She simply said she would send me his contact. An hour later, I had a message from Thomas himself. Mrs. Roberts, please don't worry. I will help you. The message was short, but it felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. At noon, I met him at a small downtown cafe, the kind with worn wooden tables and the warm, rich smell of roasted coffee filling the air. I sat in a shadowed corner where no one would notice me. Thomas walked in, a middle-aged man, short and stocky, wearing a pale blue shirt. His calm, thoughtful eyes seemed to read everything, to see through me. I handed him a flash drive. This is all I have, I said, my voice shaky. I'm not sure, but I think my husband is cheating on me. The words tasted like ash. Thomas nodded, reviewing each image on his phone with a professional calm. He scribbled notes in a small leather notebook before looking up. Mrs. Roberts, I understand. I'll start following Mr. Roberts this afternoon. Don't worry, I'll let you know as soon as possible. I bit the inside of my cheek, fighting tears. Thank you. I just want to know the truth. Whatever it is. His expression softened. I'll do my best. Go home, and don't do anything that might make him suspicious. That night, I stayed at the bakery late, surrounded by the familiar scent of flour and yeast. My phone buzzed. A message from Thomas. My heart raced as I opened it. A photo of Julian in his favorite light blue shirt, walking into a fancy restaurant holding hands with a woman. I zoomed in. My heart stopped. It was Allison, my daughter-in-law. She was wearing a tight black dress, heavy makeup, her lips painted a striking red. They didn't look like father-in-law and daughter-in-law. They looked like a couple on a date. Thomas sent more photos. In one, they sat in a secluded corner of the restaurant, candles glowing between them. Allison leaned toward Julian, smiling. Julian raised his glass to hers, his eyes soft, almost tender. A look I hadn't seen on his face in decades. Not even when we were young. When we were in San Diego, under those endless starry skies, he had looked at me like that. Back then, I believed our love would last forever. Now I knew better. At 2 a.m., another message arrived, this time a video. I put on my headphones and pressed play, my hands shaking. In the grainy footage, Allison leaned close, whispering something in Julian's ear that made him laugh, a sound I hadn't heard in years. Then they left together. Julian, ever the gentleman, opened the car door for her as if she were a lover, not his son's wife. I replayed the clip again and again, each viewing a fresh stab to the heart. Allison, the woman I'd treated like a daughter. Julian, the man I'd given my life to. What were they doing behind my back, behind Daniel's back? The questions came like a tidal wave, threatening to pull me under. I saved everything, the photos, the video, to a flash drive, documenting dates, times, and locations like evidence for a trial. I didn't want to believe it. But the truth no longer cared what I wanted. I could see the letters on the paper, though I couldn't read them clearly. But I knew these weren't normal work papers. They were planning to steal everything I had built, step by step. I sat there among trays of pastries that smelled so sweet, yet I felt as if my entire world was collapsing. I reopened the audio file, put on my headphones, and listened to every phrase, every word. That wretched old woman. That's what Allison called me. I remembered the days when she had just joined the family, when I taught her how to make rice, when I hugged her like a daughter. I had believed she was part of the family, that she and Daniel would build a future together. And Julian, the man I had loved since I was a girl in San Diego, who swore he would stay with me until the end, had turned me into a joke. A fool who still believed in love and family. The bell above the bakery door jingled. Mrs. Peterson walked in, my loyal customer who always bought pastries for her grandchildren. Juliet, Your bakery has been packed lately. Your chain of stores is expanding. I'm so proud of you, she said, her voice warm. I forced a smile. Thank you. I'm doing my best. But inside, I was unraveling. Would she still call me strong if she knew the truth? Or would she see me for what I was, a fool betrayed by her husband and her daughter-in-law? I wrapped her pastries, said goodbye, then sank into my chair, my hands clutching my head. I wanted to cry, but no tears came. Instead, a silent rage burned inside me, like an oven's fire, waiting to ignite. That night, I sat across from Julian at dinner. The small kitchen light cast a strange, yellow glow over his face, making him look almost distorted. He ate slowly, his voice flat. Juliet, I have to sign some important business papers this week. Maybe you should look them over. They are complicated. I picked up a piece of bread and pretended to take a bite. But in my head, I could still hear Allison's voice. Dad, hurry up and sign the fake contracts. I gave him a tired smile, the mask of a wife too exhausted to argue. Yes, I'll look at them later. I'm tired now. He nodded, took a sip of wine, and kept eating, calm as ever. But I knew better. Behind that calm face was a predator, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. When he finally stumbled off to bed, drunk and snoring, I cleared the table slowly, containing the fury that threatened to explode. Then I saw them, the car keys glinting under the nightstand lamp, calling to me like a siren. My heart pounded. This was my chance. I crept into the bedroom, careful not to wake him, grabbed the keys, and slipped into the garage. The night was quiet, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Crickets chirped outside, a soundtrack to my silent fury. I turned on my phone's flashlight. The weak light landed on Julian's SUV, his silent accomplice. I opened the glove compartment. There it was, a tube of lubricant, cap loose, residue dried at the edge like an ugly monument to their betrayal. I held it in my hand, my stomach churning. Then I took it to the kitchen, set it on the counter, and washed my hands with lemon soap until they were raw. The fresh scent didn't soothe me, but it steadied me. I opened the tool drawer, pulled out a tube of clear industrial superglue, and carefully replaced the lubricant's contents, drop by drop. When I was done, it looked untouched. Perfect. I placed it back in the glove compartment, adjusted the floor mat, closed the car, and checked the trunk. Crumpled bags, an empty water bottle, and an unused condom. My heart skipped, but I wasn't shocked anymore. I photographed everything, adding it to my growing evidence file. Back in the house, I returned the keys to their place. Then I sat on the sofa with an old book, pretending to read as my mind spun. I thought of Daniel, my son, who believed he was living happily with Allison. How could I tell him his wife and his father were destroying us? I thought of the bakery, 40 years of work, sleepless nights, and fights with Julian to defend my dream. He never really understood it. Now I knew he was just waiting to take it all. Later, Julian stumbled into the kitchen for water. Still awake? He asked, rubbing his eyes. I smiled faintly. Just reading. Go back to bed. He nodded, drank, and disappeared. I stared at the door after it closed, feeling slapped. This man, the one who once promised to stay with me until the end, was now my enemy. But he didn't know I had already started my counterattack. At dawn, I kneaded dough at the bakery with all my strength, channeling my rage into every motion. Back home, I kept my face calm as I served Julian breakfast. Julian, I said evenly, I have to travel to Nashville tomorrow to sign a contract with a new partner. I'll probably be home late. Can you take care of dinner? He looked up, surprised. Then something flickered in his eyes. Not concern, but relief. A big contract? He asked, taking my hand with feigned tenderness. Don't worry. Go ahead. I'll handle it. That faint smile, that glint in his eyes, as if a weight had been lifted, pierced my chest. He wanted me gone. I smiled back. Thanks. I'll call if I'm late. As he left for work, he forgot his phone on the table. The screen lit up, a missed call. Allison Thomas. My pulse spiked. Before I could touch it, Julian rushed back in, grabbed the phone, and turned off the screen. Forgot it, he said with a forced smile before leaving again. I stood there, watching the door close, feeling as if I'd been slapped a second time. He wasn't even pretending anymore. That night, I feigned exhaustion and went to bed early. Near midnight, I heard Julian rise quietly. The faint glow of his phone lit the room as he slipped out. I followed on tiptoe, hiding behind the living room curtain. He stood by the window, speaking softly into the phone. "Yes, of course. Come over tomorrow. We won't need a hotel anymore. Juliet has to leave town." A soft giggle, Allison's voice. "That's great, Dad. Finally, we can relax." Julian chuckled. "Yeah, come early. I'll be waiting." I stood there, frozen, the curtain clenched in my fist, blood pounding in my ears. They weren't just cheating. They were planning to turn my house, my son's house, into their meeting place. I returned to the bedroom in silence, opened a drawer, and took out Daniel's old recorder, the one I had bought him for college to record his classes. I checked the battery, replaced it with a fresh one, and switched it to continuous recording. Then I hid it behind the bookshelf next to the headboard, certain it would capture everything. I carefully adjusted the cable and covered it with a family photo frame, the one of the four of us at Daniel and Allison's wedding. Looking at it, a bitter taste filled my mouth. Allison's smile, Julian's arm around my son. Now they were all lies. Before going back to bed, I checked the recorder once more. Satisfied, I positioned the frame just right to hide the cable, then lay down and pretended to sleep. Julian came back into the bedroom, threw himself onto the bed, and began snoring as if nothing were wrong. My eyes stayed wide open in the darkness, more awake than ever. I reached for the clock and set the alarm earlier than usual. I closed my eyes, but not to sleep. I was ready for the next step of my plan. When the alarm went off at 5 a.m., the world was still dark. Only a faint glow from the streetlights slipped through the curtains. The house was silent, except for Julian's steady snoring. I stood in the kitchen with a cup of cold coffee in hand, staring at the skillet of oil already sitting on the stove. This was the last step, my simple smoke trap. Enough to expose the truth. I tied a thin string to the stove's igniter, ran it across to the window, and attached it to a heavy object, an old coffee can from the cabinet. All I had to do was pull, and the flame would ignite the oil, filling the kitchen with thick black smoke. Enough to alarm the neighbors. I cracked the window above the stove so the smoke would escape outside. I tested it once. The smoke rose quickly, curling into dark spirals like a warning. I shut it off immediately, checked everything again, and made sure there was no trace that could make Julian suspicious. Then I put on a jacket, grabbed my large purse, and pretended I was leaving for my trip. Before leaving, I stepped into the bedroom and gently shook Julian. "I have to go to the bus station right now," I said softly. "I'm going to sign a contract. I'll probably be back late tonight." He opened his eyes and murmured sleepily, "All right. Be careful, Juliet. Call me if you need anything." He buried his face in the pillow and went back to sleep. I looked at the man I once loved and trusted, now lying there, unaware of the trap waiting for him. My heart felt heavy, but my legs were steady as I turned away. Instead of going to the station, I crossed the street to Mrs. Peterson's house. She was my neighbor and friend. She opened the door and looked at me with concern when she saw my purse. "Juliet, what are you doing up so early? Is something wrong?" she asked gently. I forced a smile. "Mrs. Peterson, can I stay here for a few hours? I need to watch my house." She frowned but didn't press further. She poured me a hot cup of coffee and gave me a seat by the window. From there, I had a clear view of my front door, the very place where Julian and Allison would enter and the truth would be revealed. Around 10 o'clock, a taxi pulled up. Allison stepped out, wearing a light floral dress and dark sunglasses, as though afraid of being recognized. Julian opened the door, looked around nervously, then hurried her inside. I gripped my coffee cup, my heart pounding. "It's time," I murmured, switching on the app on my phone connected to the hidden recorder. Through my headphones came Allison's laughter, the clink of glasses, the heavy footsteps. Then Julian's deep voice. "All right, we don't have to hide in a hotel anymore." Allison laughed. "You really know how to pick your moments. The old hag is gone, right?" I bit my lip so hard I tasted blood. Hearing her call me the old hag with such contempt made my stomach twist with rage. Then came the sound of the bed creaking, sounds I couldn't bear to hear. I closed my eyes, breathed deeply, and told myself, "Just a little longer, Juliet. Just a little longer." Moments later, Allison's scream pierced through the recording. "What the hell is this? We're stuck." Her voice was panicked, on the edge of sobbing. "Shut up." Julian snarled. "Wait, let me see." I smiled coldly. I tapped my phone and remotely activated the smoke trap. The string jerked. The stove ignited. The skillet of oil caught fire, sending thick black smoke billowing out of the kitchen window like a dark signal. Mrs. Peterson gasped. "Juliet, your house is on fire." I feigned panic, but inside I felt calm. Neighbors began rushing into their yards, shouting, "Juliet's house is on fire. Call the firefighters." Mr. Miller, who lived next door, grabbed his phone and called the city fire department. I stayed seated, gripping my coffee cup, eyes fixed on my house. Everything was going exactly as I had planned. Through my headphones, Allison's voice grew shrill with fear. "Julian, do something. I can't move." "Don't scream," Julian growled. "I'm trying." But I knew they couldn't escape. The industrial superglue I had swapped was already doing its job, leaving them trapped in the most humiliating position possible. I pictured them struggling, panicking, and a part of me felt a grim satisfaction. Not out of cruelty, but because they had pushed me this far. They had tried to take everything. My bakery, my family, even my dignity. Now, they would pay. The smoke thickened, curling high into the air. Neighbors crowded together, murmuring and pointing. "Where's Juliet?" someone asked. "She went out of town for work," another replied. Mrs. Peterson stood silently by me, watching, suspicion in her eyes. She didn't speak, only squeezed my hand. She knew. 10 minutes later, the sharp wail of a fire truck siren echoed down the street like a death knell. The red vehicle skidded to a stop in front of my house. Daniel jumped out, still in his fire chief uniform, his face tense. "Get the equipment ready," he barked. "There might be people inside." A sharp pain struck my chest. My son, always so proud of his family, was about to witness the cruelest truth. I wanted to run to him, to hold him, to say I'm sorry. But I stayed still, letting everything unfold. Daniel led his team with a sledgehammer, smashing the front door open. The crack of splintering would echo through the street. Through my headphones came frantic sounds from the bedroom. Allison's sobbing, Julian's furious shouts. "Do something, Julian. I can't move." "Shut up. Don't scream." I gripped my phone tighter, heart racing. They were trapped, just as I had planned. I could only imagine what Daniel saw when he entered, his own father and wife, naked, glued together, pale with fear. Through the headphones, I heard his voice falter. What is this?" A firefighter behind him murmured, "Oh my God." Another let out a nervous laugh before Daniel barked. "Silence." That shout wasn't just for order, it was his last, desperate attempt to shield his pain. The truth was now laid bare, not just to him, but to his entire crew, and the whole neighborhood. It was just a small oil fire. Nothing serious. But Daniel didn't reply. I imagined him still standing in the bedroom, frozen by what he was seeing. Neighbors began gathering in front of the door, whispering and pointing. "What's happening?" "It's Julian and his daughter-in-law," a woman shouted, her voice full of shock. "Oh my God, how could this happen?" another cried. Beside me, Mrs. Peterson took out her phone and started recording silently, zooming in on Julian and Allison as they writhed on the bed, their faces twisted with pain and humiliation. She turned to me, her eyes full of both pity and anger. "Juliet, you knew about this, didn't you?" I didn't speak. I just nodded slightly, my gaze fixed on the window. Then I heard the heavy thud of Daniel's boots on the floor. He stepped out of the bedroom, his face pale. Through my headset, Julian's hoarse voice shouted, "Get everyone out of here. Close the door, Daniel." But it was too late. The whole neighborhood had already seen. Their whispers were like a chorus of condemnation. Father-in-law and daughter-in-law, caught in the act. Unbelievable. Poor Juliet, how did it come to this? The firefighters, after a moment's hesitation, did what they had to do. They wrapped sheets around Julian and Allison, trying to cover their stuck-together bodies, then carried them out on stretchers. Allison's sobs were ragged and broken. "Please, do something. I can't stand it anymore." Julian mumbled weakly, "Don't let anyone see us." But the entire neighborhood had already seen. There were gasps, looks of disgust, mocking laughs, and pitying headshakes. They were carried out through the doorway, the crowd murmuring louder. "What a disgrace. Father-in-law and daughter-in-law. My God, how filthy." When the ambulance finally pulled away, its siren screaming, the crowd didn't quiet down. This is unbelievable, Mr. Miller shouted with a laugh. I can't believe there are two people so shameless in this world. An old woman nearby shook her head. Poor Juliet, she whispered. I stood among them, feigning shock as if I had just rushed back from the bus station. Daniel stood motionless in the yard, his arms hanging loosely at his sides, his face white as a sheet. His crew avoided looking at him as they quietly packed up their gear. I knew Daniel wasn't just stunned by what he saw, his father and his wife glued together in bed, but by the double betrayal of the two people he had loved the most. I wanted to run to him, to hold him, to tell him I was sorry for letting him witness something so cruel. But I stayed silent. Mrs. Peterson walked with me to the hospital, her presence steady and wordless. We sat on the third-floor hallway bench, waiting. I kept the expression of a worried wife who had just been told her house was on fire. Hours later, a doctor came out, sweat beading on his forehead. Mrs. Roberts, he said quietly. We managed to separate them. Fortunately, there was no serious damage. They just need some skin ointment. I nodded, pretending relief, while my fingers brushed the purse that hid the 2 tubes of thick mustard I had prepared. Thank you, doctor, I said, letting my voice tremble. Can I see them? He nodded and led me to the nurse's station, where a young nurse handed me 2 tubes of ointment. She said gently, this is a very difficult situation. I'm so sorry. I gave a weak smile. The moment she turned away, I swapped the tubes for the mustard in my purse. My hands moved quickly, practiced. Inside the hospital room, Allison sat in bed, her hair a mess, her eyes red. She couldn't even look at me. Julian, pale and tired, mumbled, Juliet, I can explain. I didn't let him finish. I placed the tube of mustard on the table next to the bed and left without a word. Minutes later, a scream tore through the air. Allison's voice rang out, raw and terrified. It burns. My skin is on fire. Julian cursed in agony. What the hell is this? Who did this? The hallway filled with commotion. Patients peeked out of their rooms, whispering. It's them, an old woman told her son. The couple from the video this morning, the father-in-law with the daughter-in-law. What a disgrace, another muttered. They deserve it. The doctor and nurses rushed inside to wash their skin and apply neutralizing agents. But the damage was done. Mrs. Peterson's video of them being carried out on stretchers had already spread across the neighborhood and onto social media. I stood in the hallway, listening to the murmurs, feeling as if the entire world were witnessing the fall of the 2 people who had betrayed me. When the noise finally subsided, Daniel walked into the room holding a thick folder. I had called him as soon as the ambulance left, asking him to retrieve the evidence I had hidden and the divorce papers I had prepared. He handed me the folder silently, his eyes hollow. I opened it, removed the papers, and placed them on the table in front of Julian and Allison. My voice was cold, steady. 40 years of marriage end here. Sign these, and then disappear from my son's life and mine. Allison collapsed, sobbing. Honey, forgive me. Please. I made a mistake. Forgive me. But Daniel just stared at her, his gaze hard as stone. Then he turned and left without a word. Julian reached for my hand, his voice shaking. Juliet, listen to me. I didn't want this. I pulled away. Don't say anything else, Julian. You chose this path. Juliet, please, he shouted desperately. A nurse entered and said sharply, be quiet. This is a hospital. I turned and walked away without looking back. In the hallway, I found Daniel leaning against the wall, his head in his hands. I put my hand on his shoulder, but he didn't lift his face. Mom, he whispered, his voice breaking. Why did it have to be Dad? Why her? I didn't answer. I just hugged him tightly, sharing his pain with my own. Julian and Allison had lost everything, their dignity, their marriage, their plan. But Daniel and I had lost something too. We had lost our family. I only hoped that, with time, we might find peace. A few weeks later, the bakery was busier than ever. The little bell on the door rang all day. Juliet, you're so strong, Mrs. Peterson said one morning, holding a bag of flan. The whole neighborhood is proud of you, proud of how you defended your family and your business. I smiled and thanked her, but inside I knew the truth. Strength was nothing but the broken pieces of my heart glued together. Every time I looked at the oven where I had worked for 40 years, I thought of Julian and Allison, how they had tried to take everything from me and failed. I was still here. with my bakery, with Daniel, and with a new life. Daniel moved in right after that day. He didn't speak much about what had happened, but I noticed the change. He wasn't the cheerful, laughing Daniel I had known. His eyes carried a wound that words couldn't heal. "Mom, I want to stay here for a while," he told me that first night, suitcase in hand. "I'll help you run the bakery, talk to clients, whatever you need." I hugged him, feeling the warmth of the son I had raised, and just nodded. I knew he needed time. And so did I. Every morning we opened the bakery together. I prepared the oven and trays. Daniel reviewed invoices and called hotels and restaurants. "Mom, the Grand Hotel wants to increase their pastry order for next week," he called from the register one morning, his voice calm but subdued. "All right," I replied. "Confirm the order. I'll prepare more dough." The simple rhythm of those days gave me a peace I hadn't felt in years. No more fake smiles from Julian. No more sweet, calculating words from Allison. Just Daniel and me, taking care of what was still ours. At night, dinners were quiet but warm. Just the two of us in the small kitchen, eating simple meals and slowly, silently learning to heal. Sometimes it was rice with beans and chicken, sometimes just bread with coffee. "Mom, can you make me some flan this weekend?" Daniel asked one night with a faint smile, the first I had seen since the scandal. "All right," I replied, relieved. "But you have to help me stir the caramel." He nodded, and in that moment, I felt that we were slowly, but surely, recovering. I began making time for myself, something I had almost never done in 40 years. I joined a cooking club at the community center, where women my age shared recipes and told their stories. "Juliet, you make the best flan in the neighborhood," one woman said, laughing as I set a tray on the table. I smiled. "It's a little trick I learned back in San Diego." I also started going to church on weekends. I would sit in silence, the stained glass light falling across my face, and pray, not for Julian or Allison, but for Daniel, for myself, for the strength to move forward. Sometimes I would go for walks with Mrs. Peterson in the town square, listening to her talk about neighborhood gossip. "You know, Juliet," she would say, her eyes shining. "Everyone is still talking about Julian and Allison, but they say you're the one who won." I only smiled. I won, maybe, I thought. But the price was losing my whole family. Daniel began to change too. He grew less quiet and started telling me about his work as a firefighter. "We put out a fire at the market yesterday," he said one night over dinner. "It was really dangerous, Mom. But luckily, no one got hurt." I listened, my heart full of pride. "Please be careful," I said softly, my voice trembling. "You're all I have left." Daniel looked at me with tenderness. "Don't worry, Mom. I'll never leave you alone." Those words were like medicine. They gave me back the faith that, even though I had lost so much, I still had my son, and he would always be with me. One afternoon, while the bakery was full of customers, I sat at the cash register, watching the street outside. The bell over the door rang non-stop. The warm smell of sweet bread filled the air. I looked at the trays of flan and pastries and thought about my journey. I had built this bakery with my own hands. From a girl in San Diego to a woman who had learned to endure. Julian and Allison had tried to take everything from me, but they failed. I kept my bakery. I kept Daniel. And most importantly, I kept myself. Did you enjoy my story? Which city are you listening from? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to connect with you. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep sharing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to reading your thoughts. On the screen, you can see two